The hospital ID band was still on my wrist when I canceled the transfers. 3 broken ribs. A punctured lung. Cast on my right arm. My daughter was 6 weeks old and 40 minutes away, and the only person I'd called from that air curtain bay had just told my husband she couldn't come because of a cat. Not a sick parent. Not an emergency of her own. A cat. My sister's cat, because my sister was on a Caribbean cruise, and my mother was at a casino 2 miles from the highway, and I was the one lying in a hospital bed with a monitor counting my heartbeats while the anesthesia wore off. Daniel's voice came through the phone flat and careful, the way it goes when he's frightened and trying not to show it. He told me what she'd said word for word because he knew I'd want it word for word. Paige always lands on her feet. Your sister never has these emergencies. As if the truck that ran the red light had checked my family rank before impact. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. Everyone expects the woman in the hospital bed to fall apart, and I didn't. I looked at the band on my wrist. Then I reached for my phone with my left hand and I solved the actual problem first because that's what I do. I had already vetted a licensed overnight care agency before Nora was born. I called them. 9 sentences, calm as a Tuesday. A night nurse named Yvette let herself in with the door code 40 minutes later, and texted me a photo of my daughter asleep with her fist against her cheek. I looked at that photo for a long time. It's handled, I told the ER nurse when she asked if family was coming. She blinked. People always blink when you don't perform the breakdown they're braced for. Then I opened my banking app, and I let myself do the one thing I had spent 9 years refusing to do. I added it up. You need to know who I was before that night to understand why those numbers mattered the way they did. I grew up in a rented duplex in Aurora where the heat worked when it felt like it. I paid for community college on a grocery store closing shift, transferred on a scholarship nobody in my family understood, and built a career as a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company. I read spreadsheets for a living. Numbers don't have favorites and they don't lie to your face, which is more than I could say for some people. Daniel and I had lived carefully. 2 incomes, 1 used car, no debt. Quiet in a way nobody noticed. For 9 years, I had been sending my parents $4,500 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone. I told myself it was for my father's heart condition, for the mortgage, for the medication. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it. And somewhere along the way, being the steady one had stopped being a choice and become the only thing I knew how to be. The banking app didn't care about any of that. Just showed me the math. Inside the recurring transfer screen were 4 entries I knew by heart the way you know a scar. $2,000 a month labeled mom and dad. $1,500 for the mortgage. $900 filed under dad medical. $500 marked Megan support. $4,500 first of every month. For 108 months. The total sat at the bottom of the screen like a fact that had been waiting patiently for me to look at it. $486,000. Almost $500,000. Gone out of my life, one quiet automated payment at a time while my mother told relatives she managed on her own. I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A green check appeared. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed the second, the third, the fourth. 4 taps. Maybe 20 seconds. And 9 years simply stopped the way a faucet stops. I felt no triumph and no grief. Just a strange flat clarity. Like the moment a spreadsheet finally balances. Then, as I was closing the app, my eye caught something in the transaction history I had never once scrolled back far enough to see. A single line item buried under the dad medical label from 2 years earlier. Loan M, $40,000. Not my father's surgery. Megan. I locked the phone and lay in the dark and listened to the monitor count my heartbeats. And I let myself sit with the question I had avoided for 9 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer is that I was a pushover desperate for approval. That answer is wrong. If you've ever been the dependable one, you already know why. I did it because I had decided somewhere along the way that being needed was the same as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, no one could remove me. My grandmother Ruth understood that about me before I did. A tall, flinty woman who smelled like coffee and machine oil, and never raised her voice to get a room's attention. The year before she died, she took my hand and said, "Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't, so it'll have to be you." I thought she meant be generous. I think now she meant something closer to be vigilant. Ruth had passed the previous spring. I'd been too buried in a new pregnancy and a demanding quarter to ask what she'd left or to whom. I had assumed my mother handled it, the way I had assumed my money was buying my father's medicine. I had spent a lifetime assuming the best about people who had never once earned it, and calling that assumption love. Daniel arrived the next morning with Nora in her car seat, gray with exhaustion and red around the eyes. He lifted her out and laid her on my chest, careful of the ribs. For a minute the three of us just breathed together. That's the only part of that week I'd live again. Then the family group text started lighting up my phone on the tray table. My mother had been busy. She'd posted to the Reynolds family chain, 12 relatives, mostly aunts, mostly silent, a long message that began, "I'm heartbroken to say Paige is being dramatic again and has cut her struggling parents off out of spite." She wrote that my father's health was fragile, that they had given me everything, that she didn't know how she'd cover his medicine now. She ended with the line she had spent 30 years perfecting, "We've always managed on our own. But this is cruel." Aunt Carol had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis. Shame on her, kicking a sick man when he's down. We manage on our own. The woman had said that sentence to relatives for 9 years while cashing my transfer on the 1st of every month. I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain myself, to soften it, to manage everyone's feelings the way I had managed everything else. I set the phone face down instead. Explaining was the old me. That afternoon, Daniel set my laptop on the rolling table and I did the one thing that has never once failed to steady my hands. I built a spreadsheet. 9 years of bank statements dropped into a pivot table. I sorted $486,000 by where it had actually landed. And the picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was not the picture my mother had painted for the relatives. The mortgage payments I believed I was covering had been made 10 times in 9 years. Not 108. My father's real medical expenses, the cardiologist, the prescriptions, came to about $65,000 across the whole period. That left roughly $420,000 unaccounted for. I filtered by withdrawal location. A cluster lit up like a rash. Cash withdrawals, hundreds of them, almost all within a 2-mile radius of one zip code. I pulled up the map. Blackhawk. My mother hadn't been visiting that casino the one unlucky night she skipped her granddaughter. She had been visiting it for the better part of a decade. On my dime. While telling a room full of relatives she managed on her own. The second stream ran somewhere else entirely. Steady and deliberate year after year, until it reached a familiar name. Megan. $120,000, including that $40,000 line item filed under my father's surgery so no one would ever think to ask about it. I printed the summary to a single page on the unit's bedside printer. One clean sheet. The whole 9 years in 12 rows. I was still looking at it when my hospital room door opened slowly, and a man I hadn't called walked in. Harold. 78 years old, my mother's father, in a pressed flannel shirt buttoned to the throat, moving carefully with a cane he clearly resented. Under his free arm he carried a thick manila folder, soft and furred at the corners from age, bound with 2 crossed rubber bands gone brittle and pale. He set it on the foot of my bed like a man setting down something he'd carried a long way. He looked at the cast. At the bruising along my jaw. His jaw worked once. "Your mother said you'd had a fender bender," he said. I drove past 3 exits before I believed her. He sat in the vinyl chair, folded his spotted hands over the head of the cane, and looked at me with the steady eyes of a man who has been patient a very long time. "I knew," he said. "I always knew. About the money. About where your mother's been spending her afternoons. About what she told this family while you bled yourself dry. He tapped the folder once, just once. Not tonight, though. You've got enough tonight. We'll do this proper. In front of everyone. Where she can't squirm out the side door. Some truths, he said, only count when they're told in a full room. I looked at the folder with its brittle rubber bands and its soft worn corners, and I understood that whatever was inside it had been waiting longer than tonight. Longer maybe than the 9 years I thought I'd spent carrying this family alone. I hadn't been carrying it alone at all. Someone had been watching. Someone had been building a case. And now she was gone and he was here and Sunday was coming. My mother sent the dinner invitation as if it were a peace offering. A group text to the whole Reynolds chain, warm and wounded in equal measure. Let's all gather Sunday to welcome baby Nora and clear the air as a family. Paige, I hope you'll come and we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. 5 days after she chose a casino over her newborn granddaughter, it was a misunderstanding. Daniel read it over my shoulder and said we didn't have to go, that we could stay home with Nora and let them sit in it. And he was right. I didn't have to go. But I knew what Sunday was actually for. It wasn't to welcome my daughter. It was to get me in a room full of relatives and pressure me back into turning the money on. To perform reconciliation until I caved the way I always caved. She wanted an audience for my surrender. So I decided to give her the audience. Just not the surrender. I texted back 2 words. We'll come. And felt the trap close around the trapper. Then I called Harold and we talked for 40 minutes. And at the end he asked me one question in that dry gravel voice. You want it quiet or you want it true? I looked at Nora asleep in the crook of my good arm. At the little life I had nearly missed, busy funding a lie. True, I said. Then I'll bring the folder. Megan flew back from the cruise on Saturday and called me from the airport. No hello. No, are you all right? Just okay, so the cruise was kind of ruined. I spent the whole time stressed about my card. Mom said you had some meltdown and stopped the family money, which fine, have your feelings, but I have a launch coming. Can you just fix it before dinner tomorrow so we don't have to do a whole thing? Fix it before dinner. As if my near death and my daughter's first night alone were a clogged drain inconveniencing her content calendar. I asked her one question quietly. Megan, where do you think that money comes from? A pause. The first real pause I'd ever heard from her. From Mom and Dad, she said, but it came out with a small upward lift at the end. A question wearing the clothes of an answer. The first crack of doubt I had ever heard in my sister's voice. I told her I'd see her tomorrow. Some bills you have to read yourself before you'll believe them. Sunday morning we drove to my parents' house. The one with the mortgage I had believed I was paying. I sat in the car for a moment in the driveway. I still wore the cast. Around my wrist, the hospital ID band was 5 days old now, gone soft and gray. I kept it on purpose. I peeled it off in the car and tucked it into my coat pocket. A small hard piece of proof of exactly where I had been the night my mother chose a cat. From the curb behind us came the slow, careful tap of a cane. Harold in his Sunday flannel, the worn manila folder pinned under his arm, its brittle rubber bands catching the pale October light. He'd come separately so my mother wouldn't see us arrive together and brace. Ready? He asked on the porch. Through the front window I could see them all assembled. Aunt Carol and 2 cousins. My father in his chair. My mother moving among them, topping off coffee, playing wounded hostess. Queen of a kingdom I had financed without ever being crowned in it. Megan sat on the arm of the couch, scrolling her phone, sunburned and oblivious. I reached into Nora's diaper bag and felt the single folded page beneath the wipes where I had tucked it. Still there. Ready, I said. And I meant it in a way I never had before. Harold pushed the door open with the head of his cane, and we walked in out of the cold. My mother is, I will give her this, a gifted performer. She set down the coffee pot, pressed a hand to her chest, and moved toward Nora's car seat with her eyes already glistening for the audience. Daniel angled the seat away, gentle but immovable, and her reach became a flutter, and then she turned to the relatives and began. She told them this had been the hardest week of her life, that her daughter had suffered a little accident and used it as an excuse to abandon her struggling parents in their old age over some imagined grievance. Her voice trembled on cue. Aunt Carol nodded, though I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and I knew my 12 rows were sitting somewhere in the back of her mind already. Then my mother delivered her closer. The line she had used to win every room for 30 years. She turned to face me with wet, wounded eyes and a voice pitched perfectly for everyone watching. I don't understand where this cruelty comes from. Your sister never has these emergencies. The fourth time, in a warm, crowded room with everyone watching, she handed me the exact sentence she had used to leave my newborn alone. And she had no idea she had just loaded the gun and passed it to me grip first. The room waited for me to cry or shout or crumble. I did none of those things. I reached into the diaper bag, under the wipes, and took out one folded sheet of paper. I didn't stand. I didn't make a speech. I unfolded the page, smoothed it flat against my thigh with my one good hand, and set it on the dining table where the light from the fixture fell directly on it. Then I said, in the same level voice I used to present a quarterly forecast, "You're right, Mom. Megan never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone why." I slid the page to the center of the table. This is every dollar I sent this family for the last 9 years. 486,000 of them. The room went very still. Carol leaned in despite herself. The top rows are real. 65,000 for Dad's heart. His cardiologist, his prescriptions. 11,000 toward this mortgage. I let that sit one beat. The rest is the part Mom tells you all she manages on her own. I touched the page lightly just to guide their eyes. $290,000 in cash, withdrawn over 9 years, almost entirely within 2 miles of the casino in Blackhawk. A small sound moved around the room, the sound of a story cracking. And $120,000 to Megan, including $40,000 once filed under Dad's surgery so nobody would think to ask about it. My sister's head came up slowly. "That's where your card money comes from, Meg," I said. And I kept my voice gentle because none of this was her fault first. It came from me. It always came from me. My mother's performance had nowhere left to go. The tears she had summoned for sympathy were now just tears on a face caught in a full room, and her hand trembled around nothing. I looked at her and did not raise my voice even slightly. "It's handled," I said. 3 days of grief and 9 years of silence, compressed into 2 words. They landed in that room like a gavel. My mother reached for the only tool she had left. She called me a liar, a thief, an ungrateful daughter who had twisted everything. She got as far as your father and I never. And that's when Harold set his cane against the table and laid the manila folder down beside my single page. He coaxed the brittle rubber bands off slowly. They had been on so long they had left grooves in the cover. He opened the folder with the unhurried hands of a man who had waited a year for this exact moment, and he spoke for the first time since we'd come in that dry gravel voice that filled the room more completely than my mother's tears ever had. "I knew. I always knew." He said it to the relatives, not to her. Ruth knew too. At the end she had me trace it. He drew out a stapled document, thick and official, a Boulder law firm's name on the cover page. "This is your grandmother's trust and mine. Last spring Ruth and I moved most of what we had into it. The land. This house, which sits on our parcel and always has. The accounts." He said it where everyone could see. "It does not go to Linda. Linda doesn't manage a dollar of it." He looked at my mother then, and there was no cruelty in it. Only a tired final clarity. "We left it to Paige and to the baby. There's a fund for Nora's schooling. The rest is in trust the way Ruth wanted it, where it can't be gambled away." He tapped the cover page once. "My attorney says it stands. We made good and sure it stands." My mother's face did something I had never seen it do. The wounded matriarch mask simply fell off, and underneath was raw panic, because the house she was standing in, the kingdom she had ruled, had just been handed in a stapled document with 2 signatures to the daughter she had left in a hospital bed. The room did not look at me. The room looked at her. What happened next is the part people always hope will be an apology. I want you braced for that the way I wish I had been. She wept loud and sudden. When the room didn't soften, she turned to my father. Roy, are you going to let them do this? Say something. My father lifted his head and looked at me. His mouth opened. Paige is right, he said. Barely a whisper. Linda, the casino, you know it's been. My mother's head snapped toward him. The look she gave him was 40 years old. And he stopped. He looked back down at his hands. And that was my father's last word on the subject. I felt something in me let him go. Gently and for good. My mother, abandoned even by his silence, turned to threats. I'll fight that trust. I'll get a lawyer. You can't just take a person's home. Harold answered before I could, mild as milk. It was never your home, Linda. It was your mother's. And clean paperwork with a competent grantor is very hard to fight. He was careful with the word very. An honest man even now. In the corner, Megan was crying real tears. Not for me. In the dawning horror of a young woman realizing the well had a bottom, and that she had been standing on the person at the bottom of it her entire life. I had one thing left to do, and it was the easiest thing of all. I stood slowly because the ribs still didn't allow for drama even when the moment called for it. I took Nora's car seat from Daniel and set it on my lap for a moment. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the soft gray hospital band. 5 days old, gone limp and dull. I didn't make a speech about it. I just looped it once around the handle of my daughter's car seat and let it rest there. A small ugly piece of proof, where I would see it every time I carried her. Not the spreadsheet. Not the trust. That little band was the whole story. The night I nearly died and my family checked a cruise schedule. My mother was still talking. Threats sliding into pleading. Paige, honey, we can fix this. We're family. But her voice had stopped being able to reach me. The way a song stops when you finally leave the room it's playing in. I turned to Aunt Carol, who had gone pale and quiet, and said without heat, "Thank you for reading the numbers, Carol. I know you'll tell everyone the truth. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, and she knew it." She nodded. I looked at my father one last time. He met my eyes. I gave him a small nod that meant I understood. And it was all right, and I was still leaving. Daniel took the diaper bag. Harold gathered his folder and his cane. And the 3 generations my mother least wanted under one roof walked back out into the cold October morning. I pulled the door shut behind us with my good hand softly, because slamming it would have meant I still wanted something from the people on the other side. I didn't. The account was closed. Here is how it settled, because I know you want to know. The trust held. My mother called 2 lawyers and both told her the same thing. Harold's paperwork was clean and the threats went quiet. She and my father still live in the house. The trust allows them to stay for their lifetimes, and I am not in the business of putting an old man with a bad heart on the curb, whatever his silences cost me. But Black Hawk no longer runs on my margin. A casino with no fresh money is just a sad room with carpet. Megan got a real job at a marketing firm that does not care about her follower count. She texted me once months later. Just 3 words, where'd it go? I sent her the same single page I had set on the table. She never replied. She never asked me for money again. Aunt Carol told everyone the truth, exactly as I knew she would. And the family chat went very quiet for a long time. My father calls sometimes, but only ever when he's alone in the car. I always answer those calls. Yvette, the night nurse who texted me a photo of Nora's sleeping fist, still sends my daughter a card on her birthday. And Harold moved into a little rental 10 minutes from us. He comes for Sunday dinner and brings the folder every single time, sets it on my bookshelf and says, "In case anybody forgets." If there is one thing I learned from a hospital bed, a banking app, and 4 taps on a screen, it is this. The people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they have quietly decided they will never have to carry. And the day you stop being their bank is the day you finally get to be something better. For me, that was simply a mother to my own daughter, instead of a parent to everyone who refused to grow up. The account is closed. The folder is on the shelf. And for the first time in 9 years, every dollar I earn goes exactly where I choose.